Hello friends, this is Petradot. Thank you for tuning into this series on death, where we seek to answer questions about this topic from a Bible perspective. If you've ever lost a loved one in death, then you know how difficult it can be. I know this to be true because just a few months ago, I lost a loved one. And I know how important it is for us at this time to hear words of encouragement and comfort. But as Christians, we want to make sure that the words that we're hearing and the things that we believe about death are actually what God has to say to us. We want to make sure that they're from the Bible. And so in this series, we'll be talking about what the Bible has to say about this topic. But as Christians, we want to make sure that what we believe about death comes from God. And in the last episode of this series, I talked about what happens to a person's spirit after they die. If you haven't seen that video, be sure to check it out. But in this particular episode, I'll be talking about whether or not a person goes directly to heaven or hell after they die. And I have a lot to share from the Bible on this topic, so there will be a part 2. But for now, let's jump right into the topic. The question is, do people go directly to heaven after death? Well, to answer this question, I think it's important to look at what Jesus had to say about when we would be with him. He made a promise about that, and here's what he has to say. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there ye may be also. There are two things that really stand out from this passage when it comes to the question that we're talking about. First, Jesus said he's going to prepare mansions for us so that we can be with him. Now we know that after Jesus rose from the dead, he went to heaven. And so he's saying that he's preparing dwelling places for us there in heaven, which means that he expects to have us be there with him. Second, he said he will come back to receive us to himself. Now I want you to notice, he doesn't say that we will go to meet him before he comes to get us. Instead, he says he will come here to receive us to himself. So basically, he's preparing a place for us to be with him in heaven, and he will come back to take us there. But when will Jesus come back? Well, the disciples actually asked Jesus about his coming, and the Bible describes it in Matthew 24 in this way. And as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came unto him privately, saying, Tell us, when shall these things be? And what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world? Notice here, they ask him 3 questions. When are these things that you're talking about going to happen? But specifically, what's the sign of your coming and what's the sign of the end of the world? Well, Jesus goes on to answer their question by telling them about the many signs of the end times. Then in verse 30, he gives them a clear answer about his second coming. He says, And then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then shall all tribes of the earth mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. If you read through Matthew 24, you'll see that Jesus gave his disciples all the signs of the end times and the end of the world. But then he tells them the next sign that they will see is the sign of the coming of Jesus himself. Therefore, he was telling them that this would be at the end of the world. Now, I'm bringing out that point to show when Jesus is coming back, because he said that he would receive us or take us to himself at that time. And this lets us know that our loved ones who have passed away are not in heaven yet, because Jesus said he will come back, and at that time he will receive us unto himself. And we've just learned that his return is at the end of the world. Now, I know this might be new to some of you, and maybe you might feel sad because it's different from what you've heard before. But I want you to know that there's always hope with God, even when it comes to death, because death is not the end of the story with him. Jesus made us a promise that he will come back to receive those of us that have followed him. So even our loved ones who have died in Christ, they will be raised again when Jesus returns. Now, another passage that talks about Jesus' second coming being at the end of the world is given by Peter, and he was a disciple of Jesus Christ. The coming of Jesus is also referred to throughout the Bible as the day of the Lord, and that's the term that Peter uses in this particular passage. And here is what he has to say referring to that day of Jesus coming. He says, "But the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, in which the heavens will pass away with a great noise, and the elements will melt with fervent heat. Both the earth and the works that are in it will be burned up." Here, Peter is describing very vividly what will happen when Jesus returns. The skies will pass away, the elements will melt with heat, the earth and everything in it burns up at that time. And this lets us know that the world as we know it will not be continuing on. So it's definitely the end of the world when Jesus returns. But for even greater clarification on this, let's see what Paul has to say about that day as well. In 1 Thessalonians, Paul says, "For the Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trump of God, and the dead in Christ shall rise first." Before I go on to the next verse, I want to point out that Paul uses some very descriptive language here to show the way in which Jesus will return. He says that it will be with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, and the trumpet of God. This is sound language, loud sound language, to let us know that Jesus' second coming will not be a secret. In fact, it will be loud and it will be visible, unlike what some people may believe. And there are many more texts in the Bible that support this. But continuing on, Paul says, "Then we which are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so shall we ever be with the Lord." From this passage, we can learn two main things when it comes to death. One, the dead in Christ will rise at Jesus' coming. These are those who are saved, who died. They're coming back to life at Jesus' coming. And it's only at that time that they will have life. Two, Paul affirms that those saved that rise again, along with the living saved, will at that time rise to meet Jesus in the air. And that confirms Jesus' statement, his promise in John 14, where he said he would come back to receive us to himself. And it's important to realize that if the saved were already in heaven, there would really be no need for Jesus to come back to raise them from the dead. Now, just to recap what we've talked about here in part 1 of this topic. First, we saw that Jesus made a promise that he will come back or return to receive us to himself, to take us to be with him in heaven. Then we also saw that those who've died in Christ, those who are saved, will be caught up to meet him in the air at his coming, along with those that are alive, to go back to heaven with him. And we also saw that Jesus' second coming is at the end of the world. So it's at that time when both the dead and the living saved will be caught up to meet him in the air, and we will be with him forever. Now, in part 2 of this particular topic, I plan to look into more examples of what we've already talked about in this video, as well as the statement that Jesus made to the thief on the cross about being in paradise. We'll also look at the commonly quoted statement from Paul about absent from the body, present with the Lord. And I hope to wrap this topic up. I hope that you'll tune in. And remember, death is not the end. There is always hope in Jesus Christ. He has promised He'll return to receive us unto Himself, and He will keep that promise. If you found this video to be helpful, please share it with a friend, hit the like button, and subscribe to my channel if you haven't as yet. Until next time, take care, God bless, and Maranatha.